Okay, so this painting, previously I had varnished it with the Gambar satin varnish, and it didn't turn out. I think because of its texture, because it's bumpy and lumpy and whatnot, the varnish just pools in some areas, and once that particular varnish pools, it gets really sticky because it's not, you have to apply it so thin, and it's actually kind of hard to do, especially on something that has texture like this, kind of mountainous. And then when I did apply it, it was just kind of, it wasn't good enough. Let's just put it that way. It wasn't good enough. So I can't really think of another varnish that I think would be good enough for it. I haven't come up with something. So this is my plan. I had put an isolator, the isolation coat. Yeah, your pretty typical that stuff on it. And I like it. Makes everything nice, but it's shiny. It's too shiny for me. I don't like things that are that shiny. So I want a satin. I want a satin finish on it, especially because in this center area, even the isolation coat, a number of coats of it still doesn't make it evenly shiny, let's say, because I had used some a kind of sandy material. I think it was actually for stamps, but it makes it look kind of sandy and kind of cool, but then it doesn't take this isolation coat and it doesn't turn shiny, oh god, like the rest of it. And that's how you possibly make big messes in your studio, because you drop big buckets of things. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try the Liquitex one, and this is the non-removable, this is the permanent. So my goal is basically just to get a satin non-removable finish, because any other varnish that I put on here, it's going to be so hard to remove. The Gambar is really easy to remove. At least that's a great thing about it, because I've taken it off this canvas and on this canvas a number of times trying to get the correct finish on it, and unfortunately it just hasn't worked. This painting is just not friendly to certain things. So I'm going to use this over the isolation coat to bring it back down to a satin finish. And it's kind of a test project for me. I haven't officially put this on another painting because it is permanent. And I'm just going to see. I'm going to see what happens. But I do know I did some test things. And I did this board as a kind of tester. And what I did was I did an isolation coat, which is exactly what I have on here. And then I did the satin, that Liquitex Satin, I did that over it. And then I wanted to see if I would be able to change it back to the isolation coat, to the glossy, and the shinier, nicer, more intense colors, just in case this kind of went south with the satin, with the Liquitex. I wanted to see if I could recover it, and it returned back completely to normal, the same isolation coat standard that it was before. So I'm pretty confident that if I put the Liquitex Satin on there and I don't like it, I should just be able to do another layer of the isolation coat, and it would probably be sort of like at least get back to this standard, and then I can figure out something else. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm actually going to roll it on. I'm going to roll it on because, like I mentioned, this has so many textures and kind of lumps and mountains, and I don't know, you really can't see. Can't see too well, but it is pretty lumpy bumpy. So anyway, Here we go, here we go, da, 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 here we go. And hope for the best. And see what happens. And I have been mixing this on like a little rock mixer. You know, one of those rock tumblers. My husband has one, and I fasten this to the same thing, and to make sure that I mixed it properly with like without adding a ton of bubbles that I wouldn't be able to remove later. So we'll see. And I've tried rolling it on another little test piece, and they turned out just fine. So we'll see. Let's do it. Do I know exactly how much it's going to take? No. But my goal is to do it in one thing, because it says that you should do 2 or 3 coats, but because it's a satin varnish and it does have a little bit of that, you know, kind of waxiness addition that makes it a satin. I had read that you don't want to do like 90 coats. Like, you can do as many coats as you could possibly want of the isolation coat, of that clear, glossy, golden isolation coat, and just keep building it up, and you're not going to have any problem. Turns out pretty beautiful every single time. Unfortunately, I just don't like the gloss. And I'm picky about that. So, you know, my own downfall. But the reason that I'm rolling this on is because it has so much texture that I don't think brushing it on would be a great idea. I don't think brushing it on is going to get in all of those nooks and crannies, while this roller, I can quickly go back and forth and kind of make sure that it gets in the mountains and the hills and the valleys. So I think that's about all that I'm going to do. And if I have to come back and do a second coat, then I will. But I'm hopeful that I should only have to do this one time. Hopeful. Hopeful does not mean that I will be successful. Who knows? But either way, I think that it's going to have to look better than old glary isolation coat. And sometimes I just experiment with things and it goes completely wrong. And sometimes it turns out really super cool. I don't know, I guess that's kind of what we all do. Okay, so I've got that rolled on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around, I'm going to go like this. Because it does have a little bit of bubblage to it, but the liquid itself is pretty thin, and therefore I do the same thing with the isolation coat, the golden isolation coat. I run around and I just blow on it, And it seems to be enough to get rid of the majority of any bubbles. And I don't plan on putting another varnish on top of this. I plan on just assuming that this satin varnish is going to do a good job, because it has on other bits. And then my last thing, tweezers. Get yourself a set of tweezers, especially if you're a lady and you got some long hair. There always seems to be a hair somewhere or something that shouldn't be in there. Maybe if you brushed it on, maybe there's a brush hair. And easiest way to get rid of it, get a pair of tweezers. That way you don't mess up the layer that you just put on there. We kind of just go in the light. I got the window light there, and then I have the above light, and I'm just gonna circle around it, and surprisingly you can see the hairs pretty easily. They kind of stand out like a sore thumb. So I'm just gonna walk around while this dries and see if I can find anything that's not supposed to be there. Yeah, and see right now, it's leveled out nicely. I can't see any bubbles. I cannot see anythings. And I can't see any hairs, so that's nice. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it and hope for the best. As I said, right now I can show you that, like, I don't know if you actually can see, but you can see in the glary light in here. I'll show you the kind of texture that it has. See, with all that texture and stuff, like the gambar, the satin, it would pool up and make these little ridges and rifts. And then once it pools up in there, it'll never dry because it has to be so thin in order to make it dry correctly that you'll end up with a super shiny spots to it and super tacky. Like, they just don't dry. It's kind of amazing and super annoying, honestly. And this part, this purple green, is where I had mentioned that the isolation coat and the varnishes typically haven't been super effective because of this kind of sandy globbiness that I did. Probably shouldn't do that again, but nonetheless. So I'm hoping that if this all dries nicely, you see that it has a nice even shine so far, and if that stays true, then it should have a pretty good result. So we'll check back in a little while, see what happened. Okay, so I've come back and it's like a few hours later, actually more like 5 or so, but to see the end result of putting the satin varnish, the Liquitex Satin varnish on this painting, and I'm pretty satisfied. Actually, I'm very satisfied. It turned out really nice. I think you can see, if we can see, let's focus here. So if we pull the light all the way across you can see that everything is the same satin coverage. There's a few little spots kind of like in the center where it doesn't hold exactly the same sheen, but that's because, like I said, I can't remember the material, but I use this kind of sandy stuff. It actually may have been sand itself, so it just doesn't take the varnishes like the paint does, but it looks so much better than the Gamvar satin that I had put on it before and then had to remove multiple times. So I think it turned out really nice. And just in case you were wondering, because I did roll it on, I don't see any bubbles. So that application also went really smooth. They just disappeared. So I wouldn't worry about that with the Liquitex Satin non-removable varnish. It evens out really nicely. So, and like I said, I do not think that I'm going to put a different varnish on this, for the main reason I mentioned the texture of this painting. And if you put something on there that's going to be much more difficult to remove than the Gamvar varnish, because you can just remove that with the Gamsol that comes with. But if I was to go ahead and try to remove that with turpentine or mineral spirits, and I had to get in every little nook and valley and cranny of this painting, it would be such a pain, and I would not be confident that all of the varnish was removed. So with acrylic paintings like this, my theory is much more along the lines of I can just repaint it. If necessary, if something were to happen to it, I can color match this. I can just fix it much more easy than removing a varnish, not getting all of it off, and having to deal with that aspect in the future. So I'm just going to leave it with this non-removable surface and repaint parts of it if something ever is to happen to it. So there you go. That's what I got. Bye.